Okay. Welcome to PLUTUS IAS. This side is Sonali Jindal. Today we will take up the 3rd September 2024 daily news analysis of the Hindu newspaper. And initial 1 minute, firstly we see which of the topics that will be covered in the particular video so that you can skip the video to see the particular topic. And in every video we used to discuss like every topic how it can be asked in the prelims or the mains, and we also see if we are able to extract some of the basically examples that could be used in the mains papers. And today we will take up the first news that says law does not permit the raising of the homes. So basically the demolition of the homes by the government, if that person is accused or a convict, whether it is allowed or not, on this Supreme Court judgment has come up. So we will see what Supreme Court says about it. And the next article is about dealings at the China-Africa Forum and that India must track. So this article will help us to write the answer if anything comes on the India-Africa relations or the African nation relations with the Asian countries. In that context it can be asked, and even in the 2021 mains they have already asked about the African focus and how China or the India basically geopolitical significance lies in the Africa. And we will see the recent basically forum that held between the China and Africa and what learning should be taken by the India for this context. And this can be related to the GS2 IR topic. Similarly, the law does not permit the raising of the homes. This is also linked to the GS2. Thereafter, Disaster Management Act, Amendment Act. And Disaster Management Act, basically the changes or the amendments brought in the disaster management, we will see what are the changes recently brought and what would be the benefits of it and what more needs to be done to bring reforms in this and what are the issues in the amendments, and we will see the way forward. And you can relate it with the GS3 as the disaster management topic specifically mentioned. So they can ask directly about the Disaster Management Act as this is mentioned as a syllabus in the GS3. After that, last article that will be covered is the recently government has brought the 7 schemes for the farmers, and you can relate it with the GS3 agriculture topic, where you can use these schemes as an example, and in fact in the prelims these schemes can be asked. I hope the topics that will be covered and how it is relevant in the mains examination is clear to you. First article that talks about the law does not permit the raising of the homes of the accused. So basically the person on whom the charges has been made, that person will be accused. The law does not permit the government a right to basically demolish the house of the accused. Even Supreme Court has said even if he is a convict, still it means convict as in trial has been completed and the Supreme Court or any of the judge has declared the charges against that person. Even if he is a convict or the accused, the demolition of the homes is not allowed. Rather, the basically proper process has to be followed if there is a unauthorized or the illegal construction lies in. As the Supreme Court says, question the bulldozing of the homes and the private properties of the persons of the accused of the crime or even of their relatives as a state a possible of the act of the public retribution. So with the exam, if there is any question on the governance or like relating to the criminal justice system, on that you can mention the issues like that reduces the trust between the public and the government, as the use of the bulldozer justice is not right. So this is not allowed. You can use the Supreme Court judgment. After that, it says, like senior advocate has said, to the basically Supreme Court judge to make a statement that the bulldozer justice will not be meted out anywhere in the country. And after that, Justice Vishwanathan has said for the bulldozer justice is court was intending to lay down the uniform guidelines. So you can use this as an example of the, basically if any issue is mentioned in the GS4 ethics paper, there also you can use such kinds of basically steps that can be taken by the government or the judiciary to make a uniform guidelines. How, as the uniform guidelines will reduce the discretion of the executive. It means the actual democracy can be built up with the uniform guidelines. Reducing the discretion means building the more and establishing the accountability of the authorities. And uniform guidelines need to be laid down on a pan-India basis to streamline the procedure for identifying the unauthorized structures. So the uniform guidelines are required, and for this obviously there is a need to streamline the procedure for basically identifying the unauthorized structures, issuing the notice to the persons concerned, giving them a fair hearing and subsequent action. So basically opportunity of being heard should be given to that person, and the bulldozer justice is not the way forward to deal with such conditions. Rather we need a uniform guidelines to identify the basically unauthorized structures. Thereafter we need to give them opportunity of being heard, and then even digitalize the process will help, as the digitalization obviously will leave neither the authorities nor the persons concerned can take the advantage. So if we want to basically remove the corruption problem in this scenario, or the nepotism or political vendetta kind of situations, we need to bring the basically digitalization in the whole process, and the uniform guidelines are to be brought so that the basically accountability can be established. I hope it is clear to you how it can be used in the exam, and how it can be asked, and how it can be mentioned, and you can even use this kind of way forwards in other kinds of problems in the GS4 ethics if it is asking about the what are the long term steps to be brought for the particular problem. After this, the another article is dealing at China-Africa forum that India must track. So basically the recently meeting held between China and Africa, from this India can learn some of the things that could build the India-African strong relations. And let's discuss about the recently held meeting. The Forum on China and Africa Cooperation. So it can show in the short can be called as FOCAC, the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. This was the 9th edition of the forum, in which basically why it is significant. The forum, this meeting has come up at that point in which Africa is facing many issues. For example, there is a high inflation, currency depreciation, there is a high debt burden, and even the basically geopolitical crisis is there, Israel, Hamas basically attacks, and then the Houthi rebellions in the Mediterranean Sea, and the unconstitutional military takeovers are there in the African nation. So the whole geopolitical challenges like Russia-Ukraine war. In this situation, when the basically Africa is facing the crisis, at this point if the meeting between China and Africa comes up, this is the most significant one for the Africa. After that, what were the priorities there in this meeting? One of the we will discuss about the economic front. So basically China's ambition or the Beijing's ambition is to achieve the $300 billion trade, but at present it is around $167 billion. And you can remember this basically figures if we will compare the India Africa trade or the China Africa trade, it's around $167 billion. It means we need to bring more and more trade between the Africa and India. Although we import major oil from the African nation, we also import the other coal and other natural resources, and we also export the generic pharmaceutical products, and African market is the prime most for the India. After that, developing a sustainable and robust agriculture industry. So from the first point we have already understood, we also need to basically push the trade between India and Africa, because if the China and Africa trade is high, it means the Chinese dominance can increase in the Africa. And the second point highlights about the agriculture industry development. Like for example, India and China both have a good experience in the agricultural development. We both can help them in the fertilizers, pesticides, and the processing of the agriculture products. For example, the roasting the raw cashews, and if we are able to make the African agriculture as the more climate resilient, because there is a problem of the climate change. To curb that problem, we can work on the climate resilient agriculture. So India and China both are having the experience in the agriculture development. In that way both can help. And the other thing is we can develop a satellite system there in Africa that can help in the basically weather forecasting, and to improve the weather forecasting, that obviously will help in the better development of the agriculture and the elite sectors. Then another African priority is to industrial development and the green energy. As the African nation is a tropical country, so there is a good presence of the solar energy, and the wind energy is also there, and it is also surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean and the basically Indian Ocean. It means there is a huge potential of the offshore or the onshore basically ocean energy as well. So we can focus on the green energy, and there is also presence of the lithium in the Zimbabwe that can be processed, that can be mining further. So basically lithium refining can be done in the Zimbabwe. But however, there are some of the problems that can be created due to this, and these needs to be kept in the mind. For example, the chronic electricity shortage in the Africa. There is a lack of power generation in Africa, and in this obviously India can play a huge role with the experience of the thermal power production, and there is a huge presence of the coal there in Africa, but we can also focus on the green energy. After that, there is also a environmental, social and governance cost. ESG cost needs to be mentioned, and this is the basically term that can be used in the exam, and there is a ESG high cost due to which basically it can hamper the ability of the international companies to refine the raw minerals in the African nations. So although there is a high potential, but these are the challenges need to be addressed. That is why we are focusing on the climate resilient policies. After that, basically further the article talks about the debt issue in the Africa, as China is having its debt trap diplomacy. You can write this term. debt trap diplomacy, it means initially China gives the basically interest free or the low interest loans to the other companies and keep on increasing that debt, and after that that country is not able to pay back that debt, due to which it comes under the basically influence of the diplomacy of the China. For example, it has happened in the Sri Lanka, in which basically Hambantota port of the Sri Lanka, that has a very geostrategic location, has been given to the China on 99 years lease. That happened due to the debt trap diplomacy, and in fact due to this diplomacy, China is able to include more and more countries in its One Belt One Road initiative. It means the Chinese debt has been increasing in the basically Africa. For this, India can fill a gap by providing the more basically blended finance techniques or the financial innovative techniques. For example, we can also basically work in the increasing the presence of the RuPay cards or the UPI, or we can also provide the line of credits to the Africa also, so that we can basically curb the basically Chinese interest in the Africa, as it will obviously act against the Indian interest, because if the Chinese interest will be more there in Africa, then Africa or India relations will be impacted with it, and basically African geopolitical location is very significant for the India or the Asian countries. In that way, you can write in the exam about the Chinese debt trap diplomacy, and it has also highlighted, as per the basically Boston University Global Development Policy Center, Chinese loans was around $170 billion. Moreover, this basically debt figures or debt estimates are more complex, as some of the basically loan given to the sub-Saharan countries is not included in the sovereign debt records. It means there is a lack of transparency, and there is a opacity and the non-disclosure clauses. It further complicates the debt estimates of the Chinese loan in the Africa. But in the exam, you can mention about the debt trap diplomacy of the China whenever you are writing about the issues or the challenges with whichever country, like if the African nations or the basically any neighboring nations, you are writing about the issues that are creating the challenge for the India to maintain or the build relations with a particular country. There as an issue, you can mention about the debt trap diplomacy. After that, in the end, this editorial further talks about the lessons to be taken for the India from this particular forum, and whatever the basically developments being made by the China, how can India fill a gap. So for the first, India should also bring or held a meeting between the basically Africa and India, that is the India-African Forum Summit, that was lastly held in 2015. So it is a greatly needed that we can held this particular meeting in the coming 2025 India-Africa Forum meeting, and we can also go for the basically this will be the fourth one, and we have discussed already that the China and Africa Forum that was held, that was 9th edition, and we have only had the 3 meetings between the Africa and India, and apart from this, India-Africa Union track 1.5 diplomacy can also be held. In the track 1 diplomacy basically includes the mediation or the diplomacy relations between the governments only. In the 1.5, basically the people comes into the picture, or maybe we are including some businessmen or the NGOs. So instead of just track 1 diplomacy, we should move towards the track 1.5 diplomacy, because if you are writing in the IR about the way forward to increase the relationship with any of the country, there you should write about the people to people ties, as it has the long lasting relationship because it builds the natural or the imbibing relations between two countries if there are basically people to people ties. After that, the dialogues such as CII Exim Bank Conclave, and there is a regularly India Africa Defense Ministers meeting. It means if you are writing about the India-Africa relations or the significance or the what are the steps taken by the India to maintain the relationships with the Africa, there you can make a separate point to show about the military relationships. There you can show about the India-Africa Defense Ministers meeting are held to be regularly. In that also China has a dominance, as there is a Djibouti in Africa where China is having already a military base, and you can write about it. After that, basically secondly, India could play a central role in strengthening the integration of the African economies into the global value chain. So basically we should bring the African economies into the global value chain, because if any of the country plays a role in the economic development of the particular country, that builds the strong relationship and that strengthen the ties between the two countries, and could give the geopolitical basically significance to the India, and it can increase the voice of the India at the African forum. And we can support Africa's industrialization and to set up the manufacturing bases in the Africa, and we can create the employment and serve the local markets. In fact, now also we have one of the things that is e-web, that is a Arogya Bharti and Vidya Bharti. So basically in the Africa we are already working in the education sector and the basically health sector. Apart from that, we are also having the ITC, that is for the skill development of the African youth. And I have already told you about the basically the trade relationships between the Africa and India, and there is also a skill development programs, and we are working on the Arogya Bharti and Vidya Bharti, and we are also exporting the basically generic medicines to the African nations, and we have also helped them in the vaccine, COVID-19 vaccine. And currently we have read in the past that the mpox is being spreading in the Africa, as the pandemic has been declared in the Democratic Republic of China, DRC. So in India can also play the role in the mpox also to resolve the problem or the challenge in the Africa. Apart from it, the third lesson that should be taken by the India is we should be investing in the farm mechanization, food processing and the irrigation, establish the cold storage infrastructure, that we can work on the AAA. AAA is what? Affordable, appropriate and adaptable technologies. So we need to bring the development of the technologies in the Africa by bringing the AAA, that includes affordable, appropriate and adaptable. Apart from that, Indian private sector participation needs to be increased in the Africa. Obviously, this will also help in the track 1.5 diplomacy. After that, we need to find innovative financing solutions. So, a different type of innovative financing solution needs to be brought, so that this includes the lesser and lesser financing cost also, and these are easy to be basically take the benefits, and we need to work on the blended finance. And India's own digital stack can also help the African government to grow. For example, the Indian biometrics, mobile connectivity and Jan-Dhan technology. It means India's experience in the e-governance can be taught as a lesson to the African nations, and we can help them to build this governance. This will also decrease the problem of the corruption in the Africa that we have discussed about the complexities in the Chinese debt in the China that will reduce the basically significance of the China in the Africa, and thereby simultaneously it can increase the significance of India for the Africa. And we have discussed, like we have already launched the UPI and RuPay services in the Mauritius, Kenya, Namibia, Ghana and Mozambique. And if you are writing an exam about the relationships between the India and Africa, there you can make a separate point of the digital payment system. And we have already mentioned, we can mention about these four countries that are having the UPI and the RuPay services. And this basically obviously increases the dominance of the India and the Africa, and in the future it will obviously increase the basically diplomatic power of the India in the Africa. It means you have got many points as a way forward if you are writing about the India-Africa relations. Let's just briefly discuss again. You can mention about the agricultural development, you can mention about the technological development. By using the digital stack of the India, we can work on the industrialization of the African nations. We can help them to build their green energies, as the basically presence of the lithium refining can be done there, and that can create the employment and jobs in the African nations, that can reduce the basically the inflation problem and the poverty. Thereafter, we can help them in the mpox vaccine development, and we can also work together with the China to bring the problems farm mechanization and agricultural development. We can help them in the fertilizers and pesticides. We can build the basically climate resilient agriculture, and we can also push the trade with the Africa, as China and Africa is already having $167 billion trade. I hope the whole crux of the article is clear to you. How it can be used in the GS2 IR is clear to you. Now moving to the next article. Next article talks about the Disaster Management Amendment Act. As recently the amendments has been brought in the disaster management, we will discuss why the amendment is being brought. The recently amendment in the disaster management has been brought in the wake of the climate change. So as the climate is changing, due to this we need to bring the amendment in the disaster management, and obviously due to this the number of disasters has increased. So climate induced disasters has been seen recently. We have experienced the cloud burst and recently the landslides in the Wayanad, Kerala, and in the Sikkim also we are seeing, and there is an increase in the intensity of the monsoon there in India due to the climate change. So in the wake of the climate induced disasters, we have brought the amendment. This will be the positive side. If you are writing about the positive of the recent amendments in the disaster management, then you can write, we have brought the convergence with the climate change. But there is also a problem that we have further done the centralization of the heavily centralized disaster management. One thing should be clear to you is that disaster management is not mentioned in any of the subject, not in the union list, state list or the concurrent list. It lies or falls in the residuary powers, and you already know residuary powers goes to the basically central government and or maybe parliament. And in this we are moving towards the centralization further, and if you will realize the local power or the local people can play the larger role while tackling with the disaster. That is why we are working on the local community development. But with the centralization, there will be delay in the funds devolution and there will be delay in the action also. This is why the problem lies in the centralization in the disaster management. After that, obviously, we are moving towards a top-down approach rather than the bottom-up approach. This will also delay the basically response to the disaster, and it is antithetical to the intent and the purpose of the act. The proposed bill is also giving the statutory status to the pre-act organization. So it means the organizations that were built before the act, that is the Disaster Management Act, before that there were some of the organizations that were existing. We have given the statutory status to them. For example, the National Crisis Management Committee and the High Level Committee. But this will complicate the chain of action, and the further the centralization has been done, it will again delay the response to the disaster. Further, another concerns, due to the excess centralization of decision making on the funds, we are also centralizing the process on the decision on the funds. Again, it will result in the delay in the fund devolution, especially in the situations where the disaster is severe. So basically, when the disaster is severe, earlier the severity of the disaster was not mentioned in the Disaster Management Act, although this is a good step that we are considering some of the disaster as a severe disaster for which basically response needs to be taken faster. But in these disasters, the centralization has been done on the decision making on the funds. It is basically severity of the disaster must necessitate the prompt response by the central government, currently absent in the act. So basically, the severity needs a prompt response by the central government or the central power, but it is being missing in the act. The bill only strengthens the top-down approach affecting the vital cooperative federalism disaster management. So basically, due to the top-down approach or the centralization of more and more power in the disaster management, it will act against the cooperative federalism. I hope the meaning of the cooperative federalism is clear to you. Federalism means the sharing of powers between the center and state, and cooperative in which the both of the basically legs of the India, that is the center and state, coming together to work for the basically better development of the nation. For example, there is a Finance Commission, GST Council is also a federal institution. There is a Niti Aayog when both are working together. But the centralization of the disaster management will act as against the cooperative federalism. So it means apart from the GS3 where the Disaster Management Amendment Act can be asked directly, apart from that you can use this an example in the GS2 issues in federalism, as it is being specifically mentioned in the GS2 syllabus. So if that is being brought, there you can give the current context by giving the example of currently the Disaster Management Amendment Act is against the federalism where the centralization has been done. Apart from that, there is a restricted use definition of the disaster. So we have understood one thing till now, that the recently amendment that has been brought in the Disaster Management Act, we are working more and more centralization of the power as seen in the severe disaster also. But there is another problem also, there is a restricted definition of the disaster. So the definition of the disaster is not holistic to include all of the disasters. So the disasters that are not included in the Disaster Management Act will not get the benefits or the funds for the taking the action against that. So Ministry of State of the Science, Technology and the Earth Sciences, in response to the questions posed in the Lok Sabha, said that government is currently not planning to classify the heat waves. So basically, for the prelims also they can ask whether the heat waves is included as a disaster in the Disaster Management Act or not. You have to remember that heat waves is not declared as a disaster in the definition of the Disaster Management Act. The notified list of the disasters eligible for the assistance under the National Disaster Response Fund, State Disaster Response Fund are cyclone, drought, earthquake, fire, flood, tsunami, hailstorm, landslide, avalanche, cold burst, pest attack, cold wave and frost. You can even take the screenshot of this to remember which of the disasters are being notified as a disaster under the Disaster Management Act. I hope you have taken the screenshot, and apart from that you need to remember that heat waves is not included as a notified disaster in the Disaster Management Act. So due to the restriction on the definition, although globally there is enough consensus that the heat waves is a climate related disaster and it has to be included. Even as per IMD data, 536 heat wave days, which is the highest number of heat wave days in the almost 14 years. This year we have experienced these many heat wave days, and the proposed bill of the Disaster Management Act short as defined definition of the disaster, although wide enough to cover the idea of climate induced disasters. So in the currently definition, we have included the climate induced disasters, but the heat wave is not specifically mentioned. And in fact in the GS3 or in the GS1, if the question specifically comes on the heat waves, then you can write about the issue, or as a way forward you can mention we need to classify the heat wave as a notified in the notified list of the disaster in the Disaster Management Act, so that the funds can be allocated for that particular disaster also. I hope the wave basically due to the non-inclusion of the heat waves, we can use it in the issues as a way forward in the GS1 or the GS3 if the question specifically asks about the heat waves. And apart from that, if the question comes on the specifically about the disaster management issues, then you can write about the basically issues in the particular bill as such. And so the way forward is the conversation should not revolve around where the center or the state is responsible for the loss of lives. The question should not be whether the center or the state is responsible for the loss of lives in the Kerala. What is that can be done to manage the disasters? So the question should be what more can be done to manage the disasters and predict their future occurrence. After all, the blame game will only move away from the realizing the true spirit of the cooperative federalism. So in the disaster management also what we need is a cooperative federalism, and that on that note also we need to bring communities or the local people more in the Disaster Management Act, and the centralization should not be there. And I hope the whole editorial is clear to you, what are the amendments being brought and what more needs to be done in the disaster management. Next, last article of the day that talks about the basically schemes brought for the farmers, and you can relate it with the GS3 agriculture topic. This article mainly talks about the digital agriculture mission that has been brought. At the digital agriculture mission, you can also relate it with the e-technology in the aid of agriculture. This is the specific topic mentioned. There you can mention about the digital agriculture mission as an example in this particular topic. And in fact, if the basically question comes on the specific this scheme, although there is a less chances of it, because in the past the particular schemes has not been asked directly in the mains examination, but yes, this can be used as an example in the GS3 agriculture question. So here digital agriculture mission, that is DAM, is a consolidated database on the single platform. So basically we are building a consolidated single database on the single platform linking multiple databases. So basically we are working on creating the database so that the decision making can be done more holistically and in a better way. The plot from where the data will be taken from various union territories of the states platforms, and it comprises of the agri stack. So in the agri stack we will include the basically farm stack, crop stack and the farmer stack. So the basically the data relating to the farmers, crops and the basically their farms that will be taken together, so that the basically land acquisition can be fastened with it, and in fact the marketing issues that are being faced by the agriculture farmers, that can also be resolved, the marketing issues. And in fact the agriculture marketing is being specifically mentioned in the GS3 syllabus. So if the question comes on that, there also you can use this as a government step. And I have already told you the e-technology in the aid of the farmers, there also it can be used. It will function as a registry of the farmers, village land, maps and the crops. So the farmers information will be there, their land information will be there, so it will also help in the digitalization of the land records. The Krishi decision support system will also be there, so that we can all provide them the information and the grievance redressal. To create a comprehensive geospatial setup to unify remote sensing based information on the crops, soil, weather and water resources. Soil profile mapping to create the detailed soil profile maps on a basically scale for about 142 million. So basically we are building using the geospatial technology or the mapping technology to build these stacks that will obviously help in the agricultural development, and you can use this as an example, and because there is a less chance that they will form a mains question on the specific scheme. But you can use this as an example and a way forward of the government step taken in this context, or maybe this particular scheme can be asked in the prelims exam. So we are concluding the today's lecture. As we have discussed the whole whatever the issues or the whatever the articles important for the exam, and we have discussed about how it can be asked in the prelims and mains. All the best all of you, and thank you. We will meet tomorrow at the same time for the daily news analysis.